Stephanie was unlike most children her age. At just 5 years old, she was already showing signs of wisdom far beyond her years. Every day she would sit by her father, Jim, and ask him questions that made him pause and think. She was a serious child, always pondering things that most kids wouldn't even notice. Jim loved this about her. Her curiosity was something that made him smile, especially considering how hard he worked to provide for his family. One evening, Jim came home tired from work, craving a bit of quiet time to unwind. He sat down on the couch, hoping to relax after a long day. But Stephanie, as always, had other plans. She climbed up beside him, her small frame squeezing into the space next to him on the couch, and immediately started talking. "Dad," she began, her face serious. "Why do we dream?" Jim couldn't help but chuckle at the thought. A 5-year-old asking about dreams? But Stephanie wasn't one to ask simple questions. She wanted answers that made sense to her, and she would keep asking until she understood. "That's an excellent question, my little smarty," Jim replied, smiling at his daughter. He had always encouraged her curiosity, knowing that her questions were a reflection of her growing mind. "We dream because our brains are always working, even when we're asleep. Our brains create small stories and pictures for us to see in our dreams." Stephanie nodded thoughtfully, processing his words. But her inquisitive mind wasn't satisfied. "But why do we have different dreams? I dreamed about a princess, and Johnny from kindergarten said he saw himself on a spaceship." Jim thought for a moment, admiring his daughter's relentless questioning. "Well, each person is unique, and we all have different thoughts, feelings, and desires. Our brains show us things we learn during the day, so that's why our dreams are different." Stephanie, however, wasn't done yet. "But what do our brains do when we're awake and not dreaming?" she asked, looking up at him with wide, eager eyes. Jim laughed softly. "Well, when we're awake, our brains are still very busy. They help us think, solve problems, and make decisions. They never stop working, even when we aren't dreaming." Stephanie seemed satisfied with that answer, but Jim knew better than to think the conversation was over. Stephanie was always full of questions, always looking for a deeper meaning, and Jim loved that about her. She was a deep thinker, always exploring the world around her, trying to understand it in a way that many adults could only admire. As the conversation continued, Jim realized how serious and mature his daughter was for her age. Most 5-year-olds were concerned with playing games or following the rules at kindergarten, but not Stephanie. She had a sense of wonder and a thirst for knowledge that made her stand out. When Stephanie's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Novak, had spoken highly of her, Jim felt proud. Mrs. Novak often told him that in all her years of teaching, she had never met a child like Stephanie. She marveled at how a little girl could ask such profound questions and ponder the mysteries of the world with such intensity. Jim often smiled when he thought about it, knowing how rare it was to have a child so perceptive at such a young age. At times, when Jim would come home tired from a busy day at work, he would long for peace and quiet, just a few moments to rest and recharge. But as soon as he sat down, Stephanie would sit beside him and begin asking more questions, often about things that he had never even considered. "Dad, why do people have different skin colors?" she once asked, her wide brown eyes studying him with curiosity. Jim paused, taking in the question. He wasn't sure how to explain such a complex topic in a way that would make sense to a 5-year-old. But he knew that if he didn't try to answer her, she would keep asking until she understood. So, he did his best to explain, telling her that people are different in many ways and that everyone's skin color is special. He explained how some people's skin is darker because of the sun, while others have lighter skin. Stephanie seemed content with the answer, but Jim knew she would continue to ask questions like these every day. It was part of who she was, and Jim loved it. He felt a deep connection to his daughter, proud of how thoughtful and intelligent she was. However, there was something weighing heavily on Jim's mind. As he talked to Stephanie, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with his relationship with his wife, Ashley. For the past few weeks, she had been acting strangely. She seemed distant, avoiding his gaze and changing the subject whenever he asked if everything was okay. Jim had always trusted Ashley, but lately, he had been wondering if there was something she wasn't telling him. It bothered him, and he couldn't understand why things had suddenly changed. He had tried to push the thought aside, but it lingered in his mind, clouding his thoughts. As Stephanie finished her question and snuggled into his side, Jim couldn't help but feel a pang of worry. He didn't want his family's happiness to be shaken by whatever was going on with Ashley. But for now, he focused on Stephanie, who seemed content in her own world of questions and wonder. Jim silently hoped that whatever was troubling his wife would soon be resolved, so they could continue living their peaceful, happy life as a family. Jim's family was often viewed as perfect by the outside world, a family that everyone admired for their stability and love. However, behind closed doors, Jim carried the heavy burden of a painful past. His memories of growing up were not filled with warmth and affection like most children's. Instead, they were marked by violence, betrayal, and deep sorrow. Jim's parents, Walter and Natalie, had a toxic and abusive marriage. Walter, Jim's father, was a man full of anger, jealousy, and control. He would often lash out at his wife, Natalie, for the smallest reasons. Jim was only a child when he first witnessed his father's cruelty. One day, after coming home early from school due to a headache, Jim walked into the living room and found his father hitting his mother. The sound of his mother's cry echoed in Jim's mind, and he couldn't understand what was happening. His father's face was full of rage, and his mother, knocked back by the force of the blow, lay on the couch in pain. The sight of his father hurting his mother was something Jim could never erase from his memory. Without thinking, Jim rushed in between them, shouting, "Leave Mom alone!" His small, trembling voice was all he could muster in his fear and shock. His father, though momentarily startled, paused and looked at Jim, his fists still clenched. For a moment, Jim felt a glimmer of hope that his father might stop. But instead, Walter just waved him off, dismissing his defiance like it was nothing. He turned away, leaving his mother in tears. Jim stood there, helpless, his heart breaking as he saw his mother sobbing uncontrollably, clutching him tightly. She murmured, words that Jim could hardly understand, but through her sobs he heard her say, "I'm sorry. You'll understand someday." At that moment, Jim didn't fully understand what was happening. All he knew was that his father was a cruel man, and that his mother was the victim of his rage. Years later, Jim would come to realize the depth of his father's cruelty. Walter's actions were not just limited to physical violence. He was controlling, manipulative, and deeply jealous of anyone who came near Natalie. He forbade her from having a life outside of their home, limiting her interactions with friends and family. Jim never fully grasped the extent of his father's possessiveness until he was older. As Jim grew older, his relationship with his father became more strained. He saw more and more signs of his father's toxic nature. His mother's bruises, which she would always explain away as accidents, left a lasting impact on Jim. He started to see his father for what he truly was, a man who controlled every aspect of their lives and used fear to keep them in line. Jim's mother, Natalie, was a kind and loving woman who tried her best to keep the peace, but the emotional toll of living with Walter's abuse took its toll on her. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it was only when she was alone with Jim. One day, while going through some old boxes in the attic, Jim found a small, worn notebook belonging to his mother. When he opened it, he was shocked to find written confessions of the emotional pain she had endured throughout her marriage. The words she had kept hidden for so long were now laid bare on the pages. Through her writings, Jim learned that his mother had tried to make things work with his father for years. She had loved him deeply and believed that his jealousy was a sign of love. She had never imagined that he would turn violent. When she was in the hospital recovering from another of Walter's outbursts, a young doctor had taken an interest in her. The doctor showed her kindness and compassion, something she hadn't received from her husband in years. Slowly, their relationship evolved into something more than just doctor-patient, and Natalie found herself falling for him. It was this affair that would eventually break her marriage with Walter. Natalie knew that leaving Walter would be difficult, but she feared his anger and the potential damage it would cause. But before she could make her decision, Walter found out about the affair. The ensuing confrontation was brutal, and it ultimately led to their divorce. Jim, at the time, didn't understand the complexity of the situation. His father painted his mother as the villain, claiming she had betrayed their family. Jim, who had always looked up to his father, believed the lies. The court battle for custody was another painful chapter. Jim's father, using his connections, won the custody battle and painted his mother in such a negative light that she was barred from seeing Jim. Jim's mother, Natalie, begged to see him, but Jim stood there silent, not meeting her gaze. As Jim grew older, he began to realize that his father was not the man he had believed him to be. His memories of his mother, whom he had not seen since the divorce, were clouded by the lies Walter had told him. Jim started to piece together the truth. His father had been abusive, controlling, and selfish. His mother had endured years of suffering, trying to make the best of a bad situation. She had only wanted to protect Jim and give him a better life, but she had been trapped in a marriage that destroyed her. Jim's journey to understanding his mother's pain and the lies his father had told him took years. When Jim turned 16, he received a letter from his mother's sister, informing him that his mother had passed away. The letter had been sent weeks earlier, but Jim's father had deliberately kept it from him. This final act of cruelty was the breaking point for Jim. He left home the day he turned 18 and never looked back. Now, as an adult, Jim carried the weight of his past with him. He often thought of his mother and regretted not being there for her when she needed him most. He also feared that the same pain and betrayal would come to haunt his own family. His recent worries about Ashley's behavior were eating away at him, reminding him of the broken relationship between his parents. He hoped that history would not repeat itself, but deep down, he feared it might. It was a typical morning for Jim. After a long, exhausting day at work, he had hoped for a few peaceful moments to unwind at home. But as usual, his young daughter, Stephanie, had other plans. She was a serious, thoughtful little girl, and her mind was always full of questions. At 5 years old, she was far more perceptive than Jim had ever expected, and her deep thinking often caught him off guard. That morning, Jim had come home and settled onto the couch, hoping to rest after a long day. Stephanie, full of energy and eager to spend time with her father, climbed onto the couch next to him, her small body pressing against his side. She immediately began talking, her serious expression betraying her curiosity. "Dad," she began, looking up at him with her big brown eyes, "I know you." Jim furrowed his brow, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, smiling, thinking his daughter was simply in one of her playful moods. "I know you," she repeated, pointing at him. "Your picture is in my dad's wallet." The words hit Jim like a bolt of lightning. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he was frozen, unsure of how to respond. His mind raced as he tried to understand what Stephanie meant. He had no idea what she was talking about. He never kept pictures of anyone except his immediate family in his wallet. "Stephanie, what are you talking about?" Jim asked, now concerned. He thought she might be confused or perhaps playing some kind of game. Stephanie looked at him with a calm and serious expression, like she was explaining something obvious. "I saw it at home. Your picture, in my dad's wallet." Jim was taken aback. Who was she referring to? What picture could Stephanie be talking about? He never kept a picture of anyone outside the family in his wallet. Jim's heart started to pound as he felt a growing sense of confusion and concern. Before he could say anything further, Mrs. Novak, the teacher who looked after Stephanie at kindergarten, appeared at the door. Jim had arranged to pick up Stephanie from daycare that day, and he quickly turned to Mrs. Novak to ask what had been going on. "I think there's been some confusion," Jim began, glancing at his daughter, who was still talking about the mysterious picture in his wallet. "Can you explain to me what's happening?" Mrs. Novak hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. She wasn't sure whether this was an innocent mistake or something more serious, but she had her suspicions. She looked at Stephanie, then back at Jim and said, "Stephanie, sweetheart, who did you see with your dad's picture?" "I know it's in his wallet, Mrs. Novak. It's her," Stephanie insisted. She pointed towards the new nurse, Misty, who had just started working at the daycare. At this, Jim's heart sank. He had never mentioned Misty to Stephanie, and he was sure he had never spoken about her in any way that would have caused his daughter to know about her. The confusion and alarm on Jim's face were evident as he exchanged worried glances with Mrs. Novak. He tried to reassure himself, but everything about this situation felt strange and unsettling. Mrs. Novak, a strong believer in family values and loyalty, immediately took a defensive stance. She didn't know Misty well yet, but the thought that someone might be involved in Jim's personal life, especially a young woman who seemed out of place in the daycare setting, was enough to stir suspicions. In the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if Jim might have been hiding something. Was this just an innocent mistake, or was something else going on? Meanwhile, Stephanie's words hung heavily in the air. Jim had no idea how to explain this to Ashley, his wife. He tried to clear the air, telling Mrs. Novak, "There must be a mistake. I don't know why she said that." But as he spoke, a nagging worry crept into his mind. Could there be some truth to Stephanie's words? Why was his daughter so certain about the picture? The situation took an unexpected turn later that evening when Ashley picked up Stephanie from daycare. She was immediately told about the incident with Stephanie and the picture in Jim's wallet. As soon as Ashley heard this, her face changed. She froze for a moment, her expression shifting from calm to one of disbelief and concern. "Mom," Stephanie said, looking up at her, "Mrs. Novak didn't tell you everything. She doesn't know that the picture of the nurse is in Dad's wallet." Ashley, still processing her daughter's words, felt a rush of anxiety. Was Stephanie confused, or was there something more going on? Her mind began to race, and the possibility that Jim had been hiding something from her crossed her mind. How could he have kept a picture of someone else in his wallet? What did that mean for their marriage? That night, as the tension in their home built, Ashley began to wonder if she was being lied to. She had never suspected Jim of anything, but the sudden mention of the mysterious nurse and the picture unsettled her. Had she missed something? Was her husband hiding a secret from her? Jim, equally shaken by the confusion, knew he needed to address this. He understood that his daughter was just trying to make sense of things in her own way, but the idea that there might be a misunderstanding, or worse, a hidden truth, was too much for him to ignore. Ashley, feeling a mix of frustration and uncertainty, found herself questioning everything. The events of that day had left her feeling unsure about her husband and their relationship. She could no longer brush it off as a child's mistake. There was something more beneath the surface that needed to be uncovered. As the night wore on, Ashley and Jim realized that this simple moment with their daughter had opened a door to a far bigger conversation, one that they could no longer avoid. The tension in Jim and Ashley's relationship had been growing for weeks, but neither of them had openly addressed it. Ashley had been acting distant, avoiding Jim's gaze, and changing the subject whenever he tried to ask about her day or her feelings. Jim, feeling more and more concerned, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He had tried to brush it off, telling himself that maybe it was just stress or the pressures of family life weighing on her. But deep down, he feared that there was something more, something Ashley wasn't telling him. That evening, everything came to a head. When Ashley came home from picking up Stephanie from daycare, she didn't greet Jim with her usual smile. There was a coldness in the air, and Jim immediately felt the shift. He could see it in her eyes, the hurt, the confusion, the mistrust. The picture of the new nurse, Misty, in his wallet had caused more than just a misunderstanding. It had planted the seeds of doubt in Ashley's heart. "Jim, we need to talk," Ashley said, her voice low and tense as she turned to face him. Jim, startled by her tone, nodded, knowing that the conversation was long overdue. "Of course, honey." "What's going on?" he asked, trying to sound calm, even though his heart was racing with worry. Ashley stood up, her hands shaking slightly as she walked over to the kitchen counter. She grabbed a file from the drawer, a file she had been holding onto for days, unsure of how to bring up the truth. As she placed it in front of him, Jim noticed the strain in her posture, the hesitation in her movements. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this," she began, her voice shaky. But after everything that happened today, I can't keep it in anymore. Jim stared at her, confused and anxious, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "I'm pregnant, Jim," Ashley said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, and Jim froze. He had always dreamed of expanding their family, and hearing the news should have been a moment of joy. But the way she said it, so full of pain and apprehension, made him feel as if something was terribly wrong. Before Jim could respond, Ashley quickly added, "But that's not all. I know about you and your nurse." The words struck Jim like a punch to the gut. His breath caught in his throat as his mind scrambled to make sense of what she had just said. What did she mean? How could she know about Misty? He was certain he had never given Ashley any reason to suspect that he was involved with Misty in any way. "Jim, how could you?" Ashley continued, her voice now trembling with emotion. "I thought I could trust you, but now I feel like a complete fool. How could you do this to me?" Jim, completely taken aback, tried to calm her down. "Ashley, listen to me, please. I don't know what you're talking about. There is no one else. I swear to you. Misty is just the new nurse at daycare. I don't have any photos of her in my wallet. I don't even know where this is coming from." But Ashley wasn't listening. The hurt and doubt had taken hold of her, and she couldn't hear the words Jim was trying to say. "I've seen her, Jim. I've seen the way she looks at you, the way you've been acting around her. You've been keeping secrets from me, and I just can't ignore it anymore." Jim felt a wave of panic wash over him. His mind was spinning as he tried to make sense of Ashley's accusations. He couldn't understand how things had escalated so quickly. The thought of Misty and any kind of romantic involvement was absurd to him. He had no feelings for her beyond a professional relationship, but the more he tried to explain, the more Ashley seemed to pull away from him. "Ashley, I swear to you, there is nothing between me and Misty. I don't have her picture in my wallet, and I'm not hiding anything from you," Jim said, his voice firm but filled with desperation. He couldn't understand why Ashley wouldn't believe him. This was a misunderstanding, and yet Ashley's mind was made up. "Well, then what about the picture?" Ashley demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "Stephanie said she saw it in your wallet. What else am I supposed to think?" Jim felt his heart sink. He had no idea how to explain this. He didn't know why Stephanie had said that, but he could see how it had fueled Ashley's doubts. It was a simple mistake, a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. But no matter how many times Jim tried to explain, Ashley couldn't seem to let go of the idea that there was something more going on. "I don't have any pictures of Misty in my wallet, Ashley," Jim said again, his voice now trembling with the weight of the situation. "I don't know where Stephanie got that idea, but it's not true. Please believe me." But Ashley wasn't convinced. The seed of doubt had taken root, and it was clear that the trust between them had been shattered. The love they had built over the years seemed fragile now, broken by a simple mistake that neither of them could have anticipated. Jim felt helpless as he watched his wife walk away from him, the pain in her eyes too much to bear. He knew this wasn't just about a photo or a misunderstanding. It was about something deeper, something that had been building for weeks. Ashley's fear, her doubts, her hurt, it all came crashing down at once. And Jim had no idea how to fix it. As the night went on, the silence between them was unbearable. Jim lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of Misty, Ashley and the painful accusations that had torn through their relationship. The future he had imagined with his wife and daughter now seemed uncertain, and the weight of it all was suffocating. He knew he had to find a way to rebuild the trust that had been broken, but at that moment, he didn't know how. The following morning, Jim felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. The tension between him and Ashley had only grown worse since the night before. He could barely focus on anything else, his mind consumed by the events of the previous evening. The accusation about Misty, the new daycare nurse, and the mysterious picture had created a massive rift between him and his wife. He knew he had to clear up the misunderstanding, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was going on with Ashley. As he sat at the kitchen table, trying to drink his coffee, his thoughts kept racing back to the image of Ashley's face when she had confronted him. Her eyes had been filled with pain, confusion, and suspicion. Jim couldn't bear to see her so upset, but he also couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong. How had one simple misunderstanding about a picture led to so much distrust? Stephanie, oblivious to the storm brewing between her parents, was going about her usual morning routine, getting ready for school. Jim tried to keep his attention on her, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the argument with Ashley. He knew his wife, and he could tell that something was bothering her far beyond the issue with the picture. There was a hidden truth in the air, something Ashley hadn't told him, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. Just as he was about to leave for work, Jim received a call from Mrs. Novak, the daycare teacher. She was calling to follow up on the events from the previous day. Jim knew it was important, but he had hoped to avoid dealing with it. Still, he answered the phone, knowing he couldn't let it hang over his head any longer. "Jim, I just wanted to make sure everything's okay," Mrs. Novak said, her tone a bit hesitant. "I know Stephanie mentioned the picture in your wallet, and I just wanted to make sure there's no misunderstanding. You know how kids can be." Jim sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I'm really sorry about that, Mrs. Novak. It's a bit of a mess. I honestly don't know what Stephanie was talking about. There's no picture of Misty in my wallet, and I don't know where she got that idea from." "Well, I just wanted to make sure," Mrs. Novak replied. "You know, it's not easy with kids sometimes, but I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of it." Jim thanked her and hung up the phone, his mind still reeling. As he headed out the door, he glanced at Ashley, who was still sitting at the table, her face tense and unreadable. She didn't even look up as he left. It was clear that the conversation they needed to have wasn't going to happen that day. The day at work felt like a blur. Jim couldn't focus on anything. His thoughts kept drifting back to Ashley, to the growing distance between them. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, but he didn't know what it was. His mind wandered to the idea of Misty and whether there was any truth to Stephanie's words. It felt impossible that there could be any connection between him and the new nurse, but the more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. By the time Jim finished work, the weight of the day had worn him down. He drove home, hoping to find some sort of resolution with Ashley, but deep down, he knew it wasn't going to be easy. The silence between them had stretched on for far too long, and the tension was unbearable. When he arrived home, he found Ashley waiting for him in the living room, her face tired and strained. "I think we need to talk," Ashley said quietly, her voice tight. Jim nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know, honey. I've been thinking about this all day, and I don't want there to be any more misunderstandings between us. Ashley looked at him, her expression unreadable. I think it's more than just a misunderstanding, Jim, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, but I've been too scared. I didn't know how to bring it up. Jim felt his heart drop. What is it? You know you can tell me anything. Ashley hesitated for a moment, her gaze fixed on the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Jim, I'm pregnant. Jim froze. The words didn't register at first. He had been expecting a different kind of conversation, but this was something else entirely. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Ashley continued, her voice trembling with vulnerability. I know about you and your nurse, Jim, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could trust you, but now, I don't know what to think. I feel so betrayed. Jim's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Ashley, I swear there's nothing between me and Misty, he said urgently, trying to make her understand. I don't even know why Stephanie would say something like that. I don't have any pictures of her in my wallet. I would never... But Ashley wasn't listening. How could you keep something like that from me? She interrupted, her voice full of hurt. I thought we were building a life together, but now I feel like I don't know you anymore. Jim felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. Please, Ashley, you have to believe me. There's no one else. I've never been unfaithful to you. Misty is just the new nurse at daycare. This is all a misunderstanding. Ashley stood up, shaking her head. I don't know what to believe anymore, Jim. This is too much. I don't even know how to feel about the pregnancy now. I thought I'd be happy, but now everything feels wrong. Jim felt the ground beneath him shifting. This was not the way he had imagined things would go. The joy of hearing about the pregnancy was overshadowed by Ashley's mistrust and confusion. He had never imagined that a simple mistake, a child's misunderstanding, would lead to a rift this deep between them. Just as Jim was about to say something more, Ashley added one more thing that made his heart stop. Jim, I'm not sure if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can keep living like this with all these doubts between us. Ashley looked at him, her expression unreadable. I think it's more than just a misunderstanding, Jim, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, but I've been too scared. I didn't know how to bring it up. Jim felt his heart drop. What is it? You know you can tell me anything. Ashley hesitated for a moment, her gaze fixed on the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Jim, I'm pregnant. Jim froze. The words didn't register at first. He had been expecting a different kind of conversation. But this was something else entirely. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Ashley continued, her voice trembling with vulnerability. I know about you and your nurse, Jim, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could trust you, but now I don't know what to think. I feel so betrayed. Jim's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Ashley, I swear there's nothing between me and Misty, he said urgently, trying to make her understand. I don't even know why Stephanie would say something like that. I don't have any pictures of her in my wallet. I would never. But Ashley wasn't listening. How could you keep something like that from me? She interrupted, her voice full of hurt. I thought we were building a life together, but now I feel like I don't know you anymore. Jim felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. Please, Ashley. You have to believe me. There's no one else. I've never been unfaithful. To you. Misty is just the new nurse at daycare. This is all a misunderstanding. Ashley stood up, shaking her head. I don't know what to believe anymore, Jim. This is too much. I don't even know how to feel about the pregnancy now. I thought I'd be happy, but now everything feels wrong. Jim felt the ground beneath him shifting. This was not the way he had imagined things would go. The joy of hearing about the pregnancy was overshadowed by Ashley's mistrust and confusion. He had never imagined that a simple mistake, a child's misunderstanding, would lead to a rift this deep between them. Just as Jim was about to say something more, Ashley added one more thing that made his heart stop. Jim, I'm not sure if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can keep living like this with all these doubts between us. The words stung, like a slap in the face. Jim had no idea how to fix this, how to make things right, but he knew that he had to try. The truth about Misty, his relationship with Ashley, and the new life they were bringing into the world had all collided in a way he never expected. And now, everything was hanging by a thread. The days that followed the confrontation were filled with emotional turmoil. Jim could hardly focus on anything as he tried to process the explosion of accusations and misunderstandings. His heart was heavy, weighed down by the tension between him and Ashley. He wanted to believe that things would eventually settle down, that the truth about Misty and the picture in his wallet would clear everything up. But the air between them was thick with mistrust, and the cracks in their relationship seemed to deepen with every passing day. Jim spent the next few days trying to find a way to bridge the gap between himself and Ashley, but every time he tried to approach the subject, Ashley would pull away. Her reactions were filled with hurt, and the walls between them seemed higher than ever. Meanwhile, Stephanie, innocent and unaware of the adult tension swirling around her, went about her day, still asking her endless questions about life and the world around her. One afternoon, as Jim was sitting in the living room trying to make sense of the mess his life had become, he received an unexpected call. It was from Misty, the new nurse at the daycare. Jim had hardly spoken to her since the misunderstanding, and he was taken aback by her sudden call. He had been trying to put the entire situation behind him, but now it seemed like he couldn't escape it. Misty, Jim said, trying to sound calm. What's going on? I need to talk to you, Misty said, her voice trembling slightly. I know everything is a mess right now, and I don't want to add to it, but I have something I need to tell you. I think it's time you know the truth. Jim's heart began to race. He had no idea what she was talking about, but his instincts told him that this wasn't going to be easy. He had a sinking feeling that the past few days were just the beginning of an even more complicated situation. Come over to my place, Jim said, trying to keep his voice steady. We'll talk. When Misty arrived later that evening, Jim could see the weight of her own worries reflected in her eyes. She was visibly uncomfortable, her hands clasped tightly together as she sat down across from him. Jim didn't say anything. He just watched her, waiting for her to speak. I know this must seem strange to you, Misty began, her voice soft. But I think it's important for you to know the truth. About me, about your mother, and about you. Jim's confusion deepened. He felt a chill run through him. What are you talking about? Misty took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. Jim, I wasn't sure how to say this, but the truth is, I'm not just the new nurse at daycare, I'm your sister. The words hit Jim like a punch to the gut. He sat there, stunned, unable to process what Misty was saying. His sister? How was that possible? His mother had passed away years ago, and Jim had never known about a sibling. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what Misty was saying. Wait, Jim said, his voice shaking. How is that possible? My mother. She never told me about you. Misty nodded, her eyes filled with sadness. I know. She never told you. She kept it a secret. But I was adopted, Jim. My father, he's Alan. Your mother, Natalie, was my biological mother. The revelation hit Jim like a tidal wave. His mind raced as he tried to understand what she was saying. His mother, whom he had lost so many years ago, had kept this secret from him. She had another child, a daughter, Misty. Jim felt a flood of emotions wash over him. Shock, disbelief, and a deep sense of loss. Why had his mother kept this from him? Why had he never known about Misty? Misty continued, her voice filled with quiet emotion. I only found out when I was 18. My father, Alan, told me the truth. I didn't know about you until then. I never knew I had a brother, and when I found out, I tried to find you, but it wasn't easy. I went to the address I had, but it was a different family living there. I didn't know where to look next. Jim's heart sank as he listened to her story. The pain and confusion that Misty must have felt, growing up without knowing about him, made him ache for her. But what really struck him was the fact that their mother had kept this secret for so long. Why had she never told him about Misty? Why hadn't she brought them together? I had no idea, Jim whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know. I never imagined. I thought I was the only one. All these years, I thought I was alone. Misty's face softened with understanding. I know it must be hard to hear this all at once. I never wanted to cause you pain, Jim. But now that we've met, I want to be part of your life. I want you to know who I am, and I want to get to know you. Jim sat in stunned silence for a few moments, trying to absorb everything she had said. This new information felt like a whirlwind, turning his world upside down. He had always felt the emptiness of losing his mother, but now he was faced with the reality that he had a sister who had been kept hidden from him, just as much a part of his mother's past as he was. Misty watched him with a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. She had waited so long for this moment, hoping that Jim would accept her, hoping that they could finally have the family they had both been denied. Jim looked at her, and in that moment, he felt a sense of connection to her, a bond forged by their shared history. I don't know what to say, Jim said, his voice thick with emotion. I've spent so many years not knowing about you, but now that I do, I want to get to know you too. I don't want to let this opportunity slip away. Misty smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Thank you, Jim. That means everything to me. As Jim and Misty sat there, the The silence between them was filled with the weight of the past and the hope for the future. It was a bittersweet moment, one filled with regret and relief, loss and discovery. But for the first time in a long time, Jim felt like he wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, he could begin to heal the wounds of his past. After the truth about Misty had come to light, Jim felt a whirlwind of emotions. Discovering that Misty was his sister had completely upended his world. The flood of feelings, shock, confusion, disbelief, had been overwhelming. But as he sat with her and processed the revelation, something within him started to shift. For the first time in years, Jim felt a glimmer of hope. He was no longer alone in the world. His mother, Natalie, had kept a secret from him, but now, in the most unexpected way, he had found a part of her, a sister who had been hidden from him all this time. But while Jim was coming to terms with his newfound sibling, the issues between him and Ashley continued to simmer. The tension between them had only grown more complicated after the confrontation about the picture and the accusations about Misty. Ashley's mistrust was still palpable, and Jim could feel the distance between them every time they spoke. The situation was far from resolved, and Jim couldn't shake the feeling that Ashley was still carrying something deeper than the misunderstanding about the nurse. One evening, after another long day, Jim returned home, feeling the weight of everything pressing on his shoulders. He was exhausted from work, emotionally drained from the revelation about Misty, and concerned about his fractured relationship with Ashley. When he walked into the house, he found Ashley sitting at the kitchen table, her head buried in her hands. Her posture was slumped, and for a moment, Jim thought she might be crying. "Ashley," he said softly, stepping closer, "we need to talk." Ashley looked up, her eyes red, but there were no tears. Just a deep sadness that Jim couldn't ignore. She had always been strong, always the one to hold the family together, and to see her like this made Jim's heart ache. "I'm sorry, Jim," she said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. I should have told you sooner." Jim's heart skipped a beat. "Told me what?" Ashley wiped her eyes, taking a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant, Jim, and I'm scared. I was going to tell you, but with everything happening with Misty, I didn't know how to bring it up." Jim stared at her, stunned. The weight of the revelation hit him hard, but this time it wasn't just the shock of the pregnancy, it was the hurt in Ashley's voice. She had been carrying this news alone, just like he had been carrying the weight of the situation with Misty. They were both struggling, and neither of them had reached out to the other for support. Jim realized that he had been so focused on the chaos and confusion around Misty that he hadn't seen how much Ashley had been going through. She had been hiding her own fear and doubt, just as he had been hiding his own pain. "I didn't want to burden you, Jim," Ashley continued, her voice trembling. "With everything that's happened, I didn't know how to tell you. I thought maybe I should just handle it on my own. But I can't do this alone. I need you. I need you more than ever." Jim felt a deep pang of guilt. He had been so wrapped up in his own confusion and pain that he had failed to see the struggle in Ashley's eyes. He had failed to recognize that she, too, was dealing with her own challenges, her own fears. She had been afraid to tell him about the pregnancy because she didn't know how he would react, especially with the tension between them. Taking a deep breath, Jim sat down beside her. "Ashley, I don't know what's going on with us right now, but I know one thing. We've always been able to work through things together. And I promise, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, I'm here for you. I'm here for this baby. And I'm here for you. Ashley looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. I want to believe that, Jim. I really do. But it's been so hard lately. I don't know how we got here, how everything fell apart. Jim took her hand, gently squeezing it. I don't know either, but I do know that we've been through worse, and we've come out stronger on the other side. We've got a lot to work through, but we can do this. Together. Ashley nodded, her lips trembling as she fought back the tears. I want to believe that. I do. But I'm scared. I don't want to lose you. You won't lose me, Ashley, Jim reassured her. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, okay? Ashley nodded again, and for the first time in days, Jim saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. The walls that had been built up between them were slowly starting to crumble, piece by piece. There was still a long way to go, but Jim knew that this conversation was the beginning of their healing. The truth about Misty had shaken their lives, but now it was time to rebuild the trust and love that had been lost in the chaos. Later that evening, after dinner, Jim and Ashley sat together on the couch. The atmosphere was still heavy, but there was a sense of resolution in the air. Jim had shared his thoughts with Ashley about his new relationship with Misty, explaining the emotional roller coaster he had been on since discovering the truth about his sister. He admitted that the revelation had been overwhelming, but that he was committed to their family and to making things right with her. I'm sorry for not being more open with you, Ashley, Jim said, his voice sincere. I should have told you everything from the beginning. But I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you. Ashley looked at him, her face softening. I understand, Jim. I just needed you to be there for me, too. I needed to know that you still saw me as your partner, that we were still a team. Jim nodded, feeling the weight of her words. You are my partner, Ashley. Always. I'll never stop fighting for us. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. But for the first time in a long while, Jim felt like they were moving forward. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges to face. But he was willing to face them. With Ashley, with their growing family, and with Misty. Together, they would heal the wounds of the past and build a future full of hope. As the days passed, the tension in Jim and Ashley's home gradually began to ease. Though they still had a long way to go in rebuilding the trust that had been shaken, there was a renewed sense of hope in their relationship. The difficult conversations, the misunderstandings, and the painful revelations were still fresh in their minds, but they both knew they couldn't keep living in the shadow of the past. They had to find a way to move forward, for their sake, and for the sake of their growing family. Ashley's pregnancy brought a new layer of complexity to their lives, but it also offered an opportunity for them to rebuild their connection. Despite the misunderstandings and emotional turmoil, the news of their baby had reminded them of what really mattered: their family. Jim had promised Ashley that he was there for her and for the baby, and he was determined to keep that promise. But as they navigated this new chapter together, they both had to confront the lingering issues that had driven a wedge between them. One evening, after dinner, Jim sat down with Ashley to talk more about their future. they had already discussed their concerns, but Jim wanted to make sure they were on the same page moving forward. He didn't want any more secrets or misunderstandings to get in the way. They had already been through so much, and he was committed to making their relationship stronger than ever. "Ashley?" Jim began, his voice soft but sincere. "I know we've had our share of problems, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you, for this baby, for Stephanie. I'm in this, all the way." Ashley looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "I want to believe that, Jim. I really do. I don't want to keep questioning everything. I don't want to be suspicious, to feel like I can't trust you." "I get it," Jim said, his voice full of understanding. "And I don't want you to feel like that either. I'm sorry for the way I've acted. I've been so caught up in everything that's happened, I didn't stop to think about how it was affecting you." Ashley nodded, her eyes softening. "I just want to know that we're moving forward, Jim. I don't want to keep living in the past." Jim reached for her hand, gently squeezing it. "We will move forward, together. I promise. We've been through a lot, but I believe we can get through this. We just have to keep talking, keep working on it." Ashley smiled faintly, the weight on her shoulders lightening just a little. It wasn't an easy journey, and they both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but there was a sense of shared understanding between them. They were committed to each other, to their family, and to making things work. Later that week, Jim and Ashley sat down to talk about their plans for the future. They had always dreamed of starting a family together, and now that their dream was becoming a reality, they had to figure out how to make it work. They discussed their hopes and fears, their expectations for the baby, and how they would navigate this new chapter in their lives. Jim shared his excitement about the baby, but he also admitted that he was nervous. The thought of being a father again, of raising another child, was both thrilling and intimidating. But Ashley reassured him, reminding him that they had been through so much together already, and they could face anything as long as they were united. "Jim, we've already made it through the toughest part," Ashley said, her voice filled with conviction. "We've been through so many ups and downs, and we're still standing. We can do this. We're stronger than we think." Jim looked at her, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "You're right. We've already overcome so much, and I'm so proud of us. I'm proud of you. We can handle whatever comes our way." As the days turned into weeks, Jim and Ashley slowly began to rebuild the foundation of their relationship. They spent more time together, focusing on their connection and their shared goals for the future. They also made an effort to strengthen their bond as a family, spending quality time with Stephanie and preparing for the arrival of their new baby. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Jim glanced at Ashley and smiled. "I know we still have a lot of work to do, but I feel like we're heading in the right direction. I'm excited for what's ahead, for our family." Ashley looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth and tenderness. "I am too, Jim. I'm starting to feel like we're going to be okay. We just have to keep moving forward, keep trusting each other." For the first time in a long while, Jim felt a sense of peace settle over him. The weight of the past still lingered, but the future no longer seemed as uncertain. With Ashley by his side and their growing family to look forward to, he knew they could face whatever challenges came their way. As the weeks passed, Jim and Ashley continued to strengthen their relationship. They talked openly, honestly, and worked together to create a solid foundation for their family. They also made room for the new dynamics in their lives, including Jim's newfound relationship with his sister, Misty. Though it had been a difficult journey, Jim was beginning to see the value of the unexpected revelations. Misty had become a part of his life, and he was grateful for the chance to connect with her. The healing process wasn't easy, but with every conversation, every step forward, Jim and Ashley were rebuilding what had been broken. And as they prepared for the arrival of their baby, they both knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Their love, though tested, had endured, and now it was stronger than ever. Jim looked at Ashley, his heart full of love and gratitude. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said softly. Ashley smiled, her eyes sparkling with hope. "Yes, we have. And we still have so much more to look forward to." Together, they were ready to face the future, whatever it might bring, with hope and unwavering commitment to each other and their family.